Welcome back to Mr. Scare. For today's episode, I have a compilation of 5 road trip horror stories. And before I begin reading, I want you to smash the like button to at least 50 likes, and make sure that you have subscribed to Mr. Scare for regular horror podcasts. Ever since I was a kid, I loved going on road trips, and I have encountered so many creepy experiences. But for now, I have a total of 3 road trip stories to share from my memory. And here goes the first one. This happened back when I was still a teenager. My best friend had turned 15 and his parents went and bought him a new car as a gift. And once we had the car at our disposal, we were always out driving somewhere. I mean, once you get a taste of that sort of freedom, it's like a drug and you take it all the time. So this happened on a weekend night. We had gone out and grabbed a bite to eat. Neither of us really felt like going home. We lived in a suburban area, and we weren't really supposed to drive too far away. We also were not supposed to drive on the freeway either. However, we were bored and enthusiastic teenagers, and we were well aware that there was no way that our parents would figure out what we had done. So we got on the freeway and thought we could take it to the city too. Our inexperience caused us to make a really big mistake though. We drove into the city via the interstate. We spent a little bit of time there, and on our way back home, we got on the wrong interstate. We didn't know it back then, and we kept expecting to get back to the area we lived in, but the further and further we drove, we came to the conclusion that we must have gotten on the wrong road. After discussing it a little bit, we decided to take the next exit that we find and try to find a gas station or something. There we could ask for directions back to the right area. So without thinking to look and see if there was a sign for a gas station at the next exit, we took the exit. There were no businesses right at the exit. But we didn't want to get back on the interstate, so we drove down the road, trying to find some place or the other. I am not sure how long we were driving down that road. We did come across a few houses here and there. And there were some stores and small diners here and there too, but it was late and they were all closed. Both of us started to panic, not really sure what we needed to do to get home. We eventually decided that the best thing to do would just be to turn around, drive back to the interstate, find an exit that has a gas station, and hope that we made it without running out of fuel. So we turned to the next road, which was a very thin road. We figured we would get to the first driveway and then turn around in that. I tried to tell my friend just to pull out of the road, but he didn't want to do that. So, our situation, which was bad in the beginning and kept getting worse, had just gotten worse again. The road was dark and thin, and it didn't appear to have any driveways on it. We were both tense and scared. It was then that we saw something up ahead of us. There were 2 guys walking towards us on the side of the road. We thought this would be good for us, and that we would be able to ask them if there was a place to turn around. However, they froze when they saw us, and then after a moment, ran off the road into the woods. We were totally confused, but we assumed that there could be many reasons for this, and we kept driving. Almost a minute after that, we saw an old pickup truck laying in a ditch on the side of the road. We drove by it, and when I saw it, I felt my knees weak. There was someone sitting in the driver's seat. However, the person was not moving and their head was hanging back. There looked to be blood on the door of the truck. We passed it and eventually came to a driveway. We used it to turn around and drive back. When the truck on the side of the road came into view, we noticed that the 2 men who had run into the woods before were standing near the truck. They saw us once again, and this time they ran off a lot quicker. When we drove up to the truck, it was obvious to us that whoever was in the driver's seat was dead. This time the truck was on my friend's side of the car. When he noticed it, he just hit the gas and drove as quickly as he could. We got off the road, took the name of the road, and drove back to the interstate. The next exit had a gas station. We went there and asked the attendant to call the cops. The police had to call our parents, and we got scolded big time for having driven so far away. And the man in the truck was indeed dead. And it wasn't in a car wreck. He was stabbed several times in the chest. And we had no doubt that the men who killed him were the two guys that ran away from us when they saw us coming. Even though the guys fled both times, it was still terrifying to think that they were so close to us on that poorly lit road. We also wondered if they lived in the driveway we came across, but we don't know. All we do know is that a wrong turn can lead you somewhere you would never want to go. And if you think we learned something from this experience, let me share the next incident that I had. Now it's actually a little difficult to tell this story, so listen closely. This story took place roughly 11 or 12 years ago. My friend Jason and I grew up together. We were best friends ever since we were kids. We always sat by each other at school and we hung out during recess. After school, we played video games together. We were like extremely close friends. We even decided to go to the same college together. I thought Jason could have gotten into a much better college than mine, but just like me, he too wanted us to live the college life together. When the time came for us to leave our town for college, we left a few days earlier than required to be there and made it into a fun road trip. We gave ourselves 3 days worth of driving to get there. Now, neither Jason nor I had ever driven for such a long distance before, so it was quite an adventure for us. We thought it would be fun and exciting to watch some of the countryside before having to buckle down and study for college. The first day went fine. And on the second day, we were driving through the mountains. I felt discomfort for a significant amount of the time, and it likely had to do with the altitude of the mountains. However, around evening time, something went wrong with the car. I was driving and it suddenly stopped. I had trouble even getting it off the road. Jason and I couldn't really figure out the problem with the car. We tried to fix it, but it was beyond our expertise. We were also in an area where the cell phone signals were very poor. And since it was the first time that we were driving on these mountains, the route was new, and we didn't know how far away we were from a gas station. So we decided that one of us would hitchhike to a gas station and get some help. All of our personal belongings were in the car and in a trailer attached to the car, so one of us had to stay around it to make sure no one steals anything. Jason decided that he would be the one to go and find help. It took a while before a car picked him up. By then, there wasn't much sunlight left. So I just sat in the driver's seat and waited for him to return. The sun went down. At one point, a state trooper pulled up to the car and I had a chat with him. I let him know what was going on. He took some information and said he would drive to the gas station to see if my friend had gotten there. Apparently, almost 30 miles away from where our car had broken down, there was a gas station with a garage, and they could have towed our car for us. The officer asked how long I had been waiting for my friend to return, and I let him know that it had been over 2 hours. He told me that this time would be enough for the car to go to the gas station, get the tow truck and be back, that 2-3 times. When the officer left, I was concerned. When the officer was gone for quite a long time, I was more concerned than ever. It was dark out there, and for the first time ever, I truly felt alone. It was an odd, unpleasant feeling of discomfort. But I also sort of felt that I didn't want the officer to return, because I somehow knew it would be some sort of bad news. It was nearly 2 hours later that the officer returned. He had 2 trucks with him and I was relieved. I was sure that Jason was with them. However, when the officer came to my car, Jason wasn't there with him. He informed me that no one had stopped at the gas station to get a tow. He also checked to see if anyone had seen the car with Jason in it, but to no avail. My car was towed to the gas station. And while it was being worked upon, I had to go to the police station and file a missing report. They had to call Jason's parents and inform them that he was missing. I got a motel room in the area. I spent like 3 days in that motel, freaked out and worried that I would never see my friend again. Finally, the police came to talk to me. The car that Jason had gotten a ride in was found in a grocery store's parking lot. Jason was in the trunk. He was naked, beaten, and unconscious, but he was still alive. He was in a coma for about a fortnight before he gained consciousness again. And even after that, it took him weeks to be able to recognize me or anyone. And he took an even longer time to recall what had happened. The people that had picked him up had stolen the car that they were driving. They robbed him of his money and credit cards. It was actually due to the credit cards that they were eventually caught. There were 2 men there, and one of them is still in jail. We didn't go to college that year. But I am happy to tell you that the following autumn, we both finally made it to college together. This time, however, we flew and his parents came with us. We spent all 4 years roomed together and are still best friends to this day. Hitchhiking, for any reason, is an extremely bad idea. If Jason and I had waited, the officer would have eventually come upon us, and my friend would never have had this happen to him. Now moving on to the next one, because I don't want to remember all the visually disgusting memories. One of the most profound moments of my life came on my way to university for the first time. I was only 21 years old, and I was leaving my home for the first time. I had been on the college grounds once before, but my parents had accompanied me back then. So I left on a drive across the country in an old car by myself, for the first time ever. I have to admit being both excited and scared, more than I had ever been in my life up to that point. About 2/3 of the way through the trip, I was traveling through a hilly region. Driving through the area, I ran into a bit of car trouble. I was far enough from any town or exit, so I wasn't going to attempt to walk my way to find help. So I was worried about exactly what would happen. My cell phone didn't get any sort of signal, so I wasn't able to call for help. However, a small pickup truck pulled over and 2 men, who seemed a bit elder than me, got out and helped me. After about an hour of fiddling around with my car, they fixed my car. I offered to pay them for it, but they refused to accept anything. They just asked me to pay it forward. I assured them that I would, and honestly, I fully intended to. But making a promise when you're in the situation isn't really as easy as keeping it when you're not. A full 2 years of college passed, and I'd say that I didn't do anything that one might consider repayment of the good deed. In fact, I largely forgot about it too. I was driving home for Thanksgiving in the fall of my junior year of college. This, of course, took me right back through the same hilly area. Driving through a rather lonely stretch of road, I noticed something up in the distance, on the right side of the road. A car had been pulled over, and someone had the hood up, working on it. Immediately, everything from the experience I had 2 years earlier came back to me. I remembered how grateful I was for the kindness of the 2 guys who had helped me out when I was in need. I also remembered my promise to pay it forward. So realizing that it had been over 2 years, and that I hadn't paid the favor back, I imagined how good I would feel about doing it. Still, with all my thoughts, I didn't decide to stop right away. And the decision was made only seconds before I actually stopped the car. Rather than waiting for me to get out of my car, the man immediately came from under the hood of his car and began walking towards my passenger door. I found this odd, as I hadn't offered him a ride yet. I mean, I was going to, since I didn't have any ability to work on his car for him. But it was just strange that he would automatically assume this. However, I still remembered that I was trying to do a good deed here, so I unlocked the passenger side door. As the man approached the door and was about to lift the door handle, I noticed some movement from the back of the truck. It looked to me like a second person, crouched down, had moved from the back of the truck to the back of my car as quietly as possible. I mean, I wasn't completely sure, but it was enough to make me react quickly and lock the passenger side door right before the first man pulled up on the handle. I guess the first man hadn't expected to pull up on a locked handle, and he actually stumbled back a little. I noticed that he had a gun in the waistband of his pants. The man behind my car had obviously expected the door to be open. He had quickly moved over to the driver's side door, which I had locked just a moment before. He had a knife in his right hand. I saw the first man reach for his gun, but not before I hit the gas and took off past the 2 men and entered the tunnel ahead. I watched back as long as I possibly could, and I did see them get into their car. I kept expecting them to follow me into the tunnel, but they never did. All I can think of is that they were scared of being caught. And whatever the hell they were up to, they turned and left in the other direction. I guess maybe I was a bit too literal in my understanding of the promise. I was simply asked to repay a good deed by paying it forward. I thought that this meant that I had to help someone else whose car was broken down. This almost got me hurt and maybe killed. When I got back to school, I volunteered at a soup kitchen for the rest of the year. I was able to do a good deed that was, in fact, not life-threatening in any way. I am a driver from North Dakota, and I drove from there to Denver for the Warped Tour. I woke up in the morning at about 7 a.m., spent the day in a hot parking lot, joined in for some of the festivities, and for some ungodly reason, we decided after the show to drive home that night. Now there were two options at my disposal. I could either go through the Black Hills, or go straight up to Route I-94 in Montana and then head east to get home. I chose the latter. Now fast forward to southeastern Montana at around 3 a.m., and my only passenger had fallen fast asleep. I didn't have the GPS going on my phone. I knew that Route 212 in Montana has a fork that you need to turn right onto Route 59 to start heading north to Route I-94. I drive right past this. I drive for about 60 or 70 miles past this turn before I realized what had happened. Now it's about 4 or 4:30 a.m., and I'm in a town so small that it only has one bar and no gas station. I pull out my phone and desperately search for alternate routes. But there's no network. So I had to either take dirt roads, or I had to backtrack. I started heading north out of town on a gravel road. My passenger is awake at this point. I'm chain-smoking cigarettes while driving through the middle of nowhere in Montana, down a gravel road that has a decent amount of trees or shrubs on both sides. It seemed fine as I was at least moving ahead. But then this road had the audacity to pull out a dead-end sign out of nowhere. We hit the spot where the road turned into a prairie trail, and we had no choice but to turn around. And as we started heading back, we saw what looked to be maybe 10 or 20 LED lights blinking through the trees, which turned into what looked to be a couple of hundred lights blinking. We were hallucinating the same things. And it was getting too creepy. But I continued driving no matter what. I just wanted to get out of that area as fast as possible. After a point, I was seeing stuff like deer running out that weren't there, and hitchhikers that kept grinning at me. We knew that none of them were real. I was scared of hitting something that was really there, but I assumed to be a figment of my imagination. Eventually, I backtracked every single mile and didn't slow down or stop until we hit the North Dakota border at about 9 a.m. in the morning. I still don't even have an idea of what we may have seen, but it was a creepy experience. I told about this to a friend, and I was suggested that it might have been a trickster in the woods. They create these illusions to mess with unwary travelers and make them go crazy. He also added that it was the best decision to keep on driving, no matter what. I had been on a road trip with my group of friends and was returning home. This was about 12 or 1 o'clock at night. It was roughly a 2.5-hour drive on the main highway, and the trip was fine. But around 20 minutes from home, my friend who was driving said,
"I think that car is following us. Every time I change lanes, they change lanes. When I pass another car, they pass the car and get back behind us. They've been doing it for a long time now."
We thought it was kind of odd, and made some sort of nervous jokes about the guy being a serial killer. We passed through a couple of smaller towns, had to stop at stop signs and red lights, and the car would be just behind us. It wasn't so clear, but it looked like just one person in the car. Despite that, we didn't become much concerned, because we assumed that he wanted to go in the same way as ours. But that was until we reached the road I live on, which is a small, 2-lane road, and when we turned, this car turned behind us. Up until then, we had assumed that they were not really following us. Although now, it was getting a little freaky. He was in our lane. It got really freaky when we pulled into my driveway and the car pulled in behind us. They didn't nose in, but crossways of the drive, like they were trying to block us in. We all sat there for a moment, wondering if it was someone we knew. The car didn't look familiar to any of us. We could see the guy's silhouette, and he was just sitting there staring straight ahead. Now we were three young, big guys, and so we all three got out and walked to the car. I went around to the driver's side, and the guy was just sitting there staring straight ahead with the car still running. He was some young white guy, looked like he was 30 years old. But he wasn't anyone we knew. I tapped on the window, which I noticed was partially open, and asked the dude, "Do you need some help or something?" The guy looked at me with a sort of surprised look spreading across his face, and then he threw his car in gear and dashed out of sight. We don't have any clue as to what was up with that dude. It seemed to freak him out when he saw us. We figured that maybe it was so, that he was following someone else and got behind the wrong car and ended up following us instead.